I'm James Rosone.
And I'm Miranda Watson. We're the husband and wife writing team that created the military thriller Monroe Doctrine series and the military sci-fi series The Rise of the Republic.
We have some additional content we'd like to share with you guys today, and we hope you'll find it informative and entertaining. We're planning to create more videos similar to this in the future.
As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Now let's get started.
This is Desert Storm, Crisis in the Desert Series, Book 3, by Matt Jackson and James Rosone, c. 2021. James Rosone and Matt Jackson. Published in conjunction with Frontline Publishing, Inc., Production 11labs.io 2025. Except as permitted under the United States Copyright Act of 1976, no part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, transmitted, or stored in a database or retrieval system in any form or by any means without the prior written consent of the publisher. Additional content. Visit www.frontlinepublishinginc.com and register with your email address. It's completely free. We hope you enjoy our content. And now, the book. Chapter 1. Addressing the Nation. 1st March 1991. Oval Office, White House, Washington, D.C. Since October 5, 1947, when presidents needed to address to the nation via television, they did so from the Oval Office. President Harry Truman was the first, and every president thereafter had followed suit. The American public and the international community were familiar with the setting. The president seated behind the resolute desk, the flags framing the right and left of the picture, the credenza behind the president in front of the windows. Often the message to the nation was one of distress. This speech would be no different. In 3, 2, 1, the producer said, and pointed to the president. Good evening, my fellow Americans. I come to you with grave news that I believe needs to be told. Our nation is in a state of war with the nation of Iraq, and I feel you are owed an explanation for why that is and, more importantly, why this war needs to be fought to its rightful conclusion. Approximately 6 months ago, the armed forces of Iraq invaded the country of Kuwait. Iraq claims Kuwait is a rogue province of Iraq. They also claim that Kuwait had been stealing oil from their oil fields via slant well drilling. The Iraqi government, under the leadership of Saddam Hussein, has justified this wanton act of aggression based on the 1890 Ottoman Empire Treaty with Great Britain, which referred to Kuwait as the Basra province. At the conclusion of World War I, however, the boundaries were redrawn, establishing Kuwait as a free and independent country. The government of Iraq could have stopped their military adventurism in Kuwait, but they did not. Instead, Iraqi forces continued to advance across the Arabian Peninsula, invading the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. These overt and blatant acts of aggression cannot stand. America cannot allow a rogue dictator to assume control of over 50% of the world's oil production. The president paused for just a moment, letting his words sink in before continuing. In the past 6 months, we have attempted to negotiate a withdrawal of Iraqi forces from these lands and restore the established international borders. Our overtures of peace were instead met with violent attacks on the forces we sent to stabilize the situation. Our forces have defended themselves, but make no mistake, our forces have fought gallantly and will continue to do so. Up to this point, our responses have been defensive in nature. We do not wish to harm the Iraqi people, who have no say in the decisions made by their unelected leaders. This continued aggression must stop. Iraqi forces must withdraw to the international border established and recognized between Iraq and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Therefore, in response to Iraq's continued aggression, the following steps are being taken. 1. effective at 1200 Greenwich Mean Time tomorrow, March 8, 1991, no ships, cargo, oil, or container, as well as military shipping of any kind, will be allowed to enter the Strait of Hormuz regardless of where it is bound. 2. All shipping in the Persian Gulf must depart by March 15th, or remain in port, as any shipping in transit at that point will be considered hostile. 3rd, on March 30th, Iraqi ground forces must initiate a withdrawal from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, as well as the UAE. After the March 30th deadline, U.S. forces and our allies in this conflict will take appropriate action to remove Iraqi forces from these countries. It is my sincere desire that the Iraqi government will recognize the futility of their aggressive actions and comply with these demands. The American people only wish for a lasting peace in the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula. We take no pleasure in having our sons, our daughters, our husbands, and our wives committed to this conflict so far from home. But we are also determined to defend the oppressed and stop the aggression that has been thrust on Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Tonight, I ask for your prayers that the Iraqi government will comply with our demands and avoid further bloodshed and violence. I ask for your prayers for our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen as they prepare to remove the Iraqis from these nations. Good night, and God bless these United States of America, the President concluded. He held his stare at the camera until he heard the word "cut" from the director, as the programming cut to the major studios. Halfway around the world and 7 hours ahead of the Washington, D.C. time, Saddam sat watching the president's address on CNN. He had already received a written copy of what the president was reading on his teleprompters, so nothing was a surprise. But it still pissed him off. Others sitting with him did not move or say anything, as they watched a slow burn of anger and frustration consume Saddam. Finally, Saddam turned to the assembled officers, surprisingly calm. "Have all preparations been made?" he asked. Sultan Hashim Ahmed al-Tai, the Minister of Defense, glanced over at Ibrahim Ahmed Abd al-Satan al-Tikrit, the Armed Forces Chief of Staff, and received a reassuring nod indicating that all was prepared before he spoke. "Sir, all preparations have been made. Our forces are well supplied and are in position to blunt and destroy any advance by the American Army. The Arabian Gulf is closed with our minefield, and only those that have transited it with our pilots know the way through the minefield. Our Navy has trained extensively in ambush tactics, so if any ships exit the minefields, they will be prepared to deal with them. The Air Force has taken some losses but is capable of meeting the Americans." Al-Tikrit expounded before he was interrupted. "How many fighter aircraft can we surge to meet the Americans?" Saddam asked, looking at Hamid Raja Shalla al-Tikriti, the Air Force commander. "Sir, we can surge around 350 aircraft and sustain that for 30 days. We are prepared for them. This also does not include our close air support aircraft or our helicopters. This, combined with our air defense systems, should be sufficient to stop any American attacks," Al-Tikriti said confidently. "It better," was all Saddam said, looking across the audience. His eyes focused on one man who had not said much, nor had he been asked to speak. "What is our status?" Saddam asked the individual identified on CNN as Chemical Ali, a name he did not appreciate. "We have not moved anything from our stockpiles. Our Soviet advisors have told us the American satellites are watching them like a hawk. If we move anything too soon, it will tip them off as to our intentions. When ordered, we are prepared to move them and load the Scuds with them when the time comes," Ali Hassan al-Majid said. Saddam simply nodded. "Admiral, is our newest gift from the Chinese functioning properly?" Saddam asked, turning to Admiral Ramd Ghaib Hassan. "It is, sir. Our crew training was completed several weeks ago thanks to the cooperation we received from Rear Admiral Morteza Safari of the Iranian Navy." In August, they did their first shakedown cruise in the Arabian Sea and watched the American Prepo ships from Diego Garcia make the transition. The instructor crew would not allow them to fire on those ships at that time, but they did run drills against them and evaded one American destroyer that moved into the area. They returned to the Arabian Gulf and have completed their training. As we speak, they are preparing to get underway from Bandar Abbas Naval Base, where they have been undergoing their training. If an American satellite happens to spot it, it would appear to be one of the new submarines Iran has purchased, Hassan indicated. Continuing, it has been brought to our attention that the Soviets have been training the Iranians in one of their kilo subs and will put to sea accompanying our submarine. Good. I think it is time for us to put our Chinese gift to sea and be prepared to engage the American Navy, particularly their aircraft carriers or amphibious ships, beginning on March 15th, Saddam said, as he stood and turned to face the assembled officers. Gentlemen, the Americans are not going to be a pushover, as we have already seen with the 16th Airborne Corps. The American attack helicopters and anti-tank weapons are formidable. We must inflict maximum damage on them, and if possible, we want these attacks on their forces to be spectacular. Remember, the American public is our target. The American public cannot accept a protracted war with heavy losses. We must show them the destruction and suffering we are inflicting on their sons and daughters, and will continue to inflict until they leave our lands. If in the opening days of this war we can demonstrate how heavy the losses on the American forces will be, then the President will be forced to sue for peace, and it'll be on our terms. We will give him back the UAE and half of Saudi Arabia, but we will keep Kuwait and the northern half of Saudi Arabia. We will retain a port on the Red Sea and the ports in Kuwait. We will no longer be a desert beggar and a landlocked nation. All right, you know what must be done. Now go do it. Chapter 2. Plans change. 2nd March 1991. Iraqi 3rd Squadron. 50 kilometers east of Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. Major Vitaly Popkov banked his MiG-29 Fulcrum hard to the right as he dispersed another barrage of flares. Moments later, the AIM-9 Sidewinder missile passed under his fighter and slammed into one of the decoys. Popkov breathed a sigh of relief, just long enough to pull his aircraft hard again. Only this time, he pulled the nose up and applied his air brakes, enabling his aircraft to bleed off nearly half his airspeed as he cut power to his engines. The maneuver was called the Cobra, as it involved using the entire aircraft as an air brake by flaring the nose and body of the aircraft nearly vertical while cutting its thrust, thus allowing the pursuing aircraft to fly right past you. If the pilot acted quickly enough, he could acquire the pursuing enemy aircraft and take him out before he knew what had happened. In the case of Major Popkov, he'd mastered this maneuver and shot down 5 enemy aircraft with it so far. As he executed the maneuver, the large American F-15C Eagle flew right past him. Popkov closed his air brakes and immediately applied maximum military power to his engines to give chase. The instant G-forces of going from near 0 kilometers per hour to over 800 and climbing slammed him into his seat. The Eagle driver realized what had just happened, but was powerless to stop what he knew was about to happen. He desperately tried to put some distance between them, lighting his 2 Pratt & Whitney F-100 turbofan engines to maximum. By dumping fuel right onto his engine to light up his afterburners, the pilot creating the perfect target for Popkov's missiles, the perfect target to chase after. Popkov activated his R-73 AA-11 Archer missile and waited for the infrared seeker head to indicate it had a solid lock on the Eagle's 2 engines. It took only seconds for the seeker to lock on, and once it had, Popkov fired. The missile dropped briefly away from his left wing before its rocket motor kicked in and accelerated to Mach 2.5. The Eagle driver banked hard to his right, spitting out flares as he did. Popkov did his best to make sure he stayed on the pilot. For a brief moment, he thought his missile was going to go for one of the flares. He activated another R-73 missile and waited for the tonal sound indicating it had a solid lock. As soon as he heard it, he depressed the firing stud one more time. His second missile leapt after the F-15. The American pilot pulled up hard and took his aircraft nearly vertical, lighting up his afterburners again. He's trying to outrun the missiles, Popkov thought. The American fired off additional flares. To Popkov's frustration, one of the R-73 missiles went for the flare and blew up harmlessly. Then the second missile got within range of its proximity fuse and blew up. The shotgun blast of steel ball bearings ripped into the rear of the F-15. It took part of the left stabilizer off and caused the left engine to catch fire. The fighter started to level out as the pilot changed direction, looking to get closer to the Omani border. When the aircraft leveled out, Popkov could see the flames spreading from the left engine up the spine of the aircraft. He was lining up to finish the American off with his guns when the pilot decided he was done. He ejected. Less than a minute later, the F-15 blew apart. The fire had reached the internal fuel stores and ignited. One down, now to see who's left. The warning tone in his headset alerted him to glance at his SPO-15 Berioza radar display, confirming that he was being locked up. The Eagle driver he'd just shot down had a partner that was angling to get a shot on him. Popkov then did something crazy. He dove straight for the ground. As he was diving, he was picking up speed and bleeding altitude like crazy. Instead of pulling up or leveling off, he continued to aim down and pushed even steeper into the dive, then rolled, inverted, essentially pulling off a somersault in the air with his aircraft. His RWR stopped screaming in his ear as the American lost its lock on him. Pulling up hard and applying more power, Popkov saw he was just 300 meters above the desert floor. He was whipping past Iraqi ground units spread out in their defensive positions on the ground. Aiming his aircraft back up into the sky, he caught sight of the American that had been chasing him. The Eagle driver was already angling in to attack one of his comrades. Looking at his radar, he saw the American fighter was roughly 26 kilometers away. He was clearly giving chase to another one of Popkov's fighters. Applying more power to his engines, he looked to close the distance and checked his ordnance load. He still had 2 R-27 missiles left and 2 R-73s. Artem leader, Lynx actual, how copy? Popkov crinkled his eyebrows at the call. Why is ground control calling me? Lynx actual, Artem leader, I'm a little busy right now. Artem leader, we are tracking a flight of 12 medium bombers approaching from Sector 3. They are flying at an altitude of 100 meters, speed 700 kilometers. Can you intercept? Damn, those must be F-111s looking to slip past us to bomb the airport. Lynx actual, understood. Breaking off current attack, will attempt to intercept. Out. Sorry, my friend. You're on your own against the F-15, Popkov thought. Changing course, he headed right for the bombers. They were unfortunately a little far off from him right now. Popkov wasn't sure he'd be able to intercept them before they overflew the airport, if that was in fact their intended target. 495th Tactical Fighter Squadron. Major William Gunslinger Kidd's F-111 Aardvark was screaming across the desert barely 100 meters above the ground. He was leading a strike of 12 bombers to make a run across the Abu Dhabi International Airport. Each aircraft was carrying a stick of 24 BLU-107 anti-runway cratering bombs on their 4 underwing hardpoints. The U.S. variant of the French Durandal bombers were specially made for use on the F-111 for this very type of mission. The other 4 hardpoints were carrying another 24 500-pound MiG-82 dumb bombs, which they'd look to drop on their second pass over the airport's fuel farms and supporting maintenance hangars. After this attack run, The Iraqis and their Soviet contract pilots won't be able to use this airfield again, Gunslinger thought, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Then his radio chirped. Karma Leader, Oz Actual. We're showing a lot of SAM activity around the target. We count 5 SA-10 radar trucks, 2 SA-12 radars, 6 SA-4s, and 12 SA-6 trucks intermixed with at least 15 other radar-guided gun trucks. You need to do your best to stay below 100 feet, called out the E-3 sentry from a few hundred kilometers behind them. Good grief. How are we supposed to fly through all that? Gunslinger thought. He depressed the talk button. Oz Actual, Karma Leader. Good copy. Break. Wizard 6, you copy all of that? Karma Leader, Wizard 6, we copy. Going hot with the magic. Halo element is moving to engage. Good luck and happy hunting. Wizard 6 out. Hot damn. I hope those Sparkvarks are able to jam all those radars, Kung Fu said, a bit of concern in his voice. Hey, we've flown through this kind of stuff in the past. We'll get through it like we always do, Gunslinger said, trying to reassure Kung Fu, his weapons officer, and himself at the same time. Don't forget, we've also got the Fighting Hawks. You know, the 23rd Tactical Fighter Squadron. Those F-4s are outstanding weasel platforms. They'll handle the SAMs, you just make sure our weapons are ready to drop when the time comes. I don't want to have to make any more passes over the target than necessary. No one spoke for a few minutes. They continued to monitor their radar and what was going on all around them. Some 20,000 feet above them, the F-15s flying escort duty for them were mixing it up with a group of MiG-29s. The damn MiG pilots were good. This wasn't the first time they'd flown against them. Hey, my scopes are going a little haywire, Kung Fu announced, a bit of concern in his voice. It's okay. It's the jamming from the Sparkvarks, see? Gunslinger pointed to the airport, off in the distance. We're almost to the target. I'm going to line us up to fly across runway 31L. Go ahead and get our stick of Durandals ready. As Gunslinger lined their aircraft up for its attack, the other Aardvarks were doing the same. Each aircraft had a specific part of the runway they were going to crater. Some would hammer the runways, others would hammer the taxiways, and still others would nail the parking ramps. Once each aircraft had released their initial stick of bombs, they'd line up for a second pass. Only this time, they'd overfly the terminals, fuel farms, and anything else of value to plaster with their remaining 500-pound dumb bombs. Then they'd hightail it out of there back to the Gulf of Oman, where they'd link up with the tankers to top off their fuel before flying on to their home in Egypt along the Red Sea. Once he'd lined up for his attack run, Gunslinger pulled back on the throttle, slowing them down. He needed to make sure they didn't overshoot the runway. Keeping his eyes on his speed, altitude, and position, he told Weapons Officer it was his show now. Preparing for weapons release, Kung Fu called out. As their aircraft closed in on the runway they were about to bomb, the sky all around them lit up with anti-aircraft fire. Red and green tracer fire flew right at them. Some of it was being spread wild, while some of it looked like it was going to rip them right out of the sky. Then Kung Fu started releasing their first stick of runway cratering bombs. When the first stick had fallen away, the second stick released, then the third, then the fourth and final stick. Gunslinger could feel the aircraft practically lift 100 feet as the weight of those bombs fell away. Applying some additional power to the engines, he pulled the stick to the right a few degrees as he angled back out over the desert. He now wanted to realign the bomber for the final attack run on the airport. As they finished making their turn, he caught a great view of the Abu Dhabi airport. The runways looked thoroughly wrecked. Fire and smoke billowed from some of the commercial aircraft exploding and being torn apart. Holy crap! We made it through that storm of AA fire. Just as he was starting to breathe a sigh of relief, their RWR lit up, telling them an enemy radar was attempting to lock them up. "Missile, 6 o'clock!" Kung Fu shouted urgently. Gunslinger banked hard to the left and lit up their afterburners. He saw the body of a missile zip right through the space where they had just been. He dispensed flares and chaff in an attempt to throw off whatever radar was trying to lock them up. Craning his head around, he tried to see who or what had shot at them. Then he saw a missile slam into Karma 3 and blow it apart. The missile hit the aircraft in the center of the fuselage, and the entire aircraft erupted into flames. Then a gray object flew right past them, shaking their aircraft as it did. "What the hell was that?" Kung Fu shouted as he tried to catch a glimpse of whatever had flown by. "I think that was a MiG." "Where the hell did he come from?" "Who cares? Drop our ordnance. We're going to go supersonic and get the hell out of here," Gunslinger ordered. "All Karma elements, dump your ordnance and go supersonic. Head to the rally point now. We got a fox in the henhouse," he called out to his bombers. If they had a MiG inside their formations, they needed to get out of here. As soon as Kung Fu dumped their sticks of 500-pound bombs, the aircraft again lifted a few hundred feet. Adjusting their wings to their fully swept-back position, Gunslinger accelerated the aircraft up to Mach 2.3. "Karma elements, sound off." One by one, the aardvarks sounded off. It became apparent they'd lost 4 aircraft. What they'd start to figure out as they sped away was who had been taken out by the lone MiG that seemed to have gotten within their ranks rather than by ground fire or SAMs. In any case, the Abu Dhabi airport was officially done as a forward airbase for the Iraqis. This was a key target that had to be taken out in preparation for the ground offensive that was slated to start on April 1st, just 28 days away. CENTCOM Forward HQ, Military Technological College, Muscat, Oman. Major Stuba had been called to General Schless's office. What now? Stuba thought as he approached the open door to the general's office, pausing there. He was about to knock when General Schless, who was on the phone, motioned for him to come in and take a seat. "Yes, sir. We will go over it and get back to you," Schless said, hanging the phone up. "Sir, you wanted to see me," Stuba said as he took a seat opposite him. "Jack, we got a problem. It appears that the 35th National Guard Division will not be ready in time to get here. Instead, they're sending the Tiger Brigade from the 2nd Armored Division, which was alerted 3 weeks ago and is already on their way." Typical snafu at the Pentagon. They forgot to tell us until just now. It seems that General Boomer now has reservations about the 1st Marine Division being able to attack the Iraqi 10th Armored Division through those mountains. He's concerned that the 1st is going to get hung up in Fujairah and not be able to put any pressure on the 10th, and that would leave the 2nd Marines in dire straits coming ashore, Schless explained, hoping Jack might have some insight into what they should do. "Sir, the 1st Mardiv has almost no one opposing him in Fujairah. He should be through there in hours and not days. And yes, he is going to be pushing through some very rugged terrain that will impede his forward progress. It also impedes anyone attempting to attack him. As he breaks out of the rugged terrain, he has an avenue to the north that he can flank the 10th. 7 miles to Maleha puts him on the northern flank of the 10th. On the south, it's the same, 9 miles to Al-Madam with open terrain," Stuba pointed out. "That was my thought as well. General Boomer is pretty adamant that he wants 3 divisions to go against the 10th Armored," Schless said in resignation. "Look this over again and get back to me before the end of the day with a proposal." "Sir, it's too late for us to put the Tiger Brigade in the task organization for this first phase. The only thing we can do is steal from Peter to pay Paul, and that's going to piss off some other commander," Stuba explained, hoping his boss would see that. "I know, but we have to come up with something. If people complain, then Schwarzkopf is going to have to decide. Not our fight there, we just recommend," Schless said. "You really think 4 MEBs are enough to take the 10th? "Sir, the Marines have their own air force. They can pound the 10th into the Stone Age before we launch the ground assault," Stuba said in frustration. "Well, Boomer doesn't see it that way, so come up with something and then the dogfight can begin between the heavy hitters. Just get me something before this evening's brief. We'll brief the changes there." "Now go," Schless said, pointing to the door. As Stuba walked back to the office of the Jedi Knights, as they were referred to, he was mumbling to himself at the thought of having to change the plans and the orders at this point. When he got to the office, the others were waiting in anticipation of this event. "All right, listen up. General Boomer feels that he needs more forces to take out the 10th Armored. He feels that 1st Mardiv will have a tough time getting through the mountains to take them head-on. So, we have to see where we can get more forces from, and move them to support the Marines," Jack explained. The looks on the other majors' faces showed exhaustion and frustration with this latest request. Jim Rumgay pointed out, "First, we need to see how another division could attack." "Shit! There are only 2 roads through those mountains in his sector, and the 1st would have them both. If we put another division in there, how could they even move through there? This is crazy." "Let's look at another avenue of approach to the 10th and see what we got," Roy McLean said, pulling out a map of the AO. Everyone gathered around to examine the map. "We've identified these 2 highways that come through the mountains from Fujairah, but that's all there is. No other way through those mountains," Major Bob Peters indicated. "Nah! What about the Marines air assaulting over the mountains?" Major Fred Thompson asked. "The choppers will all be tied up with the amphibious operation for the 2nd, and they won't be able to do double duty," Major Mike Monroe clarified. "Well, is there another approach we aren't seeing?" Stuba asked, as everyone continued to study the map. "Certainly nothing north of here. Hell, how do these people get around in this country? You'd have to be a mountain goat to live up in this northern area," Rumgay observed. After a few minutes, Thompson said, "Hey, look at this." He dragged his finger across the map. Highway 7 approaches Al Ain and Al Burami, but before it clears the last of the mountains, there's a road cutting north behind this low ridge, and then at Niue it opens to flat ground. We could bring a division down Highway 7 to Humeda and position them between Humeda and Niue the night before. On order, they attack west to Margam and Al Madam. That would put 3 divisions on the 10th, with the 1st Mar coming from the east, an amphibious landing coming from the west, and another division coming from the south. "Why the hell didn't we see this before?" Thompson said with a bit of excitement in his voice. "Looks damn good to me," McLean said. "Now the fun part. Who do we get to pull another division from?" "There's only one corps that we can look to. That's 7 Corps, and I can tell you General Franks will not be happy. Who do you think he would be willing to give up?" Stuba asked. "1st British Armored," Monroe said. Everyone looked at him. The Marines have worked with British units before in some of the maneuvers in Norway. I believe they were supposed to do it again this winter. Frank's forces in Germany have trained with the British, but the Germans aren't exactly fond of having the British running loose in the countryside with U.S. forces. Last time that team pretty well tore Germany up. Franks would want to keep his U.S. forces and would rather cut the Brits loose. I think the Brits and Marines would get along just fine, given how many exercises they've done together. Everyone exchanged looks, seeing if there was any counter-argument. Stuba spoke up then. "All in favor?" Everyone's hand went up. "That settles it. We recommend that 1st British Armor be transferred to Marsent, and that the battle plan be changed, having them stage out of, what should we call this staging area?" Stuba asked. "Tactical Assembly Area Biscuits?" McLean said with a smirk on his face. "Staging out of TAA Biscuits to attack northwest to Margam. Any questions?" Jack asked. There were none. "Why call it biscuits?" Jack asked, looking at McLean. "The Brits are always eating their biscuits with tea. It fits," McLean said. That evening at the commander's brief, the change was briefed, and surprisingly, no objections were raised. Approved. Chapter 3. 1st British Division Shift. 4th of March, 1991. 1st British Division HQ, Adam Oman. "You have got to be bloody kidding me," the commander of 4th Brigade, Brigadier Christopher Hammerbeck, said with disgust. "Brigadier, I assure you that I am not kidding," General de la Billière, the commander of British forces, explained. "We are loading up our kit and heading north. Seems the Marines don't think they have the force to take on the 10th Armored Division, and we are going to come to rescue them. CENTCOM is sending all the transport we need for the equipment, and planes will be landing in Fahud to fly the troops north to Sohar, where our wheeled vehicles will be waiting. The Hets will deliver our tracked vehicles, and we'll hop in them when it's time to go." He paused for a second before adding, "I've been assured that the military police will have a traffic schedule and clear the roads for this move. For this to work, and for us to maintain the element of surprise, this must all come off quickly and smoothly with the least amount of radio traffic. The order of movement will be 4th Brigade, followed by 7th Brigade. The deputy will develop the flow and provide you all with the timetable. Have your number 2 get with him for you transport requirements by 0600 tomorrow. I know this will appear confusing to the lads, but deception is part of any good plan, especially when it deceives those that are to carry it out," General de la Billière said with a smile. "Sir, if I may, just when is this move to take place?" asked Brigadier General Patrick Cordingley, 7th Brigade Commander, trying to figure out when his brigade would be on the road. "In 72 hours, General," de la Billière declared. "As soon as it gets dark, we'll get on the move. It'll provide us good cover, don't you think?" General de la Billière could tell by the stunned looks on everyone's face that the reality of going into combat was suddenly hitting them. "Gentlemen, this needs to stay quiet and kept to yourselves. On April 1st, the air campaign that will kick off this entire offensive will start. General Schwarzkopf believes the air campaign will last at least 2 weeks, and maybe 3 before he gives the official go order to launch the attack. That means we'll have some time to get ourselves ready, but not much. We need to be ready to move sooner if an opportunity presents itself. So do what you can to get your forces moved to Robbie. I would think it unprofessional on our part if General Schwarzkopf felt compelled to extend the air campaign because we could not be in position and ready to do our part. Anything that can be packed and ready for the move should be prepared now and over the next 72 hours." The general paused for a moment, then closed. "I think that about covers everything. Would anyone care for tea, or have I just stymied your appetites?" "Sergeant Major," Lieutenant Colonel Bellew called out as he returned from a meeting with Brigadier Cordingley. Turning to his runner, he said, "Find the Sergeant Major and be quick about it." Bellew was not in a good mood. He'd been commander of the 1st Battalion Royal Scots for less than a year. Like the families of everyone in the battalion, his family remained in Münster, West Germany, where the battalion was permanently stationed. A graduate of Sandhurst, he had always been a soldier and liked serving in the oldest regiment of the British Army, which had been formed in 1633. Sergeant Major Smith had been born and raised in the regiment. He joined the Army right out of high school and found the military lifestyle to be exactly what he needed and longed for. While he was a model soldier now, he'd had his time of hell-raising as a junior enlisted. He was the epitome of what Hollywood pictured as a sergeant major. Solid build at 6'4" with not an ounce of fat at 235 pounds. He loved to play rugby on the battalion team and took the hits as well as any man, and gave them too, regardless of rank. His well-trimmed handlebar mustache was a thing of beauty, highlighting his square jaw. As the sergeant major approached the colonel's quarters, Major Saunders, the battalion executive officer, arrived at the same time. Saunders was the opposite of the sergeant major. A short man at 5'6", he had attended Sandhurst, graduating as a 2nd lieutenant. "Any idea what this is about, sir?" the sergeant major asked. "No, but I understand he is in a fit," Major Saunders indicated. "He has been up at brigade most of the evening, and I have no idea what that was about. Sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing. I suspect we are about to find out." As the sergeant major and the executive officer entered the tent, they saw a world map spread out on a table with Bellew studying it. "Sir, you wanted to see us?" Major Saunders inquired. "Yes, we have orders to move," Bellew muttered, still looking over the map. "Move, sir?" "Yes, sir. How far?" the sergeant major asked. A couple of 100 miles north, and we have 3 days to get ready for it, Ballou fumed. The sergeant major was unflappable, but Major Saunders had that 3,000-meter stare going on at the idea of moving in less than 3 days. Did you say a couple 100 miles and only 3 days to be ready, sir? The major asked. Are you ears full of sand, Major? That is what I said. Ballou was normally a very polite and even-keeled leader, but not today. The bloody Yanks couldn't get their fucking act together, and the United States Marine Corps sniveled, to General Schwarzkopf, mind you, that they needed help. And rather than take an American division, they are sending us to pull their bacon out of the fire. Where exactly are we going, sir? The sergeant major asked. We are being flown to Sohar up here, he replied, pointing at the map, where we will have transport to here at Rabi and join our track vehicles. HETs will arrive in 48 hours to load them up. MPs have our convoy clearances and schedules. I will be leaving in the morning with the company commanders and driving up to Rabi to check the area over and look at the tactical assembly area that we will stage out of to launch our attack. Number 2, you and the sergeant major will have to get things organized back here and get it loaded and moved out. Any questions? How much can we tell the lads, sir? The sergeant major asked. You can tell them they are moving to a new location, and that is all, although I suspect they will figure it out. We move under the cover of darkness, so any Iraqi aircraft won't spot us. The lads will know something is afoot. These kids are not dumb. Aye, sir. They will figure it out very quickly, the sergeant major agreed. Standing up straight to stretch his back, Lieutenant Colonel Ballou looked at the two gentlemen. I think it is about that time. Anyone care for tea? Chapter 4. The Plan. Phase 1. 7 March 1991. Arsent HQ. Muscat, Oman. Gentlemen, if you take a seat, we will get started, General Yosak said as he entered the room. The gentlemen consisted of every division commander under Arsent and Marsent, as well as regimental commanders and combat aviation brigade commanders. Whenever you're ready, General Taylor, Yosak directed. General Taylor was the G3, or operations officer for Arsent. The ground tactical plan rested on his shoulders, and he had worked closely with the Jedi Knights in the development of the plan. Yes, sir. First slide, please, he requested. Gentlemen, this is the task organization for this first phase of the operation. There is one change that I want to point out. The 35th Infantry Division will not be joining us as we anticipated. It seems they couldn't get ready fast enough, so the Tiger Brigade of the 2nd Armored Division will be joining us instead. Once they arrive, which will be at the end of Phase 1, we anticipate them being attached to Marsent. For Phase 1, 1st British Armored Division will operate under Marsent. Taylor paused long enough for everyone to read the slide. Are there any questions? There were none, as everyone had known from the beginning who was going to be with who. Next slide. Again, Taylor paused as the slide came on the screen. He allowed the audience to read the slide. Mission. On order, Arsent attacks to destroy Iraqi forces in sector and prepares to continue the attack through Saudi Arabia and into Kuwait. Be prepared to continue the attack. In preparation for Phase 1, mine-clearing operations will commence on 10th of March. On G-Day, offensive operations will commence, with 1st Marine Division attacking to clear Fujairah and continuing the attack to clear the highway from Fujairah to Maghribiyah and Mleha. Be prepared to conduct link-up with 2nd Marine Division on G+1, vicinity of Dubai. The 1st British will attack northwest under the command of Marsent to clear Al-Hiyar, Al-Faqqa, Murkwab, and Al-Madam. Conduct link-up with 1st Marine Division. 3 Corps attacks in center of the western sector and to seize Abu Dhabi. This will also cut off any chance of the Iraqi force breaking out of Al Ain. General Taylor paused just long enough for a question to be posed, but none came. 7 Corps will attack the southern portion of the sector here," he pointed to a spot on the map, "and look to destroy the Iraqi forces in that sector. This will allow them to seize Al-Hiali, Zayed City, and Al-Ruwais along the coast, which will put 7 Corps in position to continue attacking west." Taylor then waited for a new map to be brought up, one that showed the western side of Saudi Arabia. In the west, the Softun 8 Airborne Corps conducts offensive operations to seize Tabuk. Once they seize Tabuk, it will position our forces to attack eastward. As our forces push out of Tabuk and continue to advance east, the Iraqis will have to withdraw the 2nd Republican Guard Corps from Medina, or face the likelihood of them being completely encircled and cut off from their supply lines and any avenue of retreat. Many of the generals nodded in agreement. On G+2, the 2nd Marine Division will conduct their amphibious landings between Dubai and Abu Dhabi. This will further cut Iraqi supply lines and prevent them from withdrawing north unless they act quickly. If they fail to see the avenues of retreat closing, then there's a good chance we may be able to encircle these divisions in the UAE and Saudi and destroy them. That concludes my brief. What questions do you have? General Taylor asked before moving on. Again, there were none. General Taylor continued, "The main effort is 7th Corps. The commander's intent is for a swift penetration by the 7th Corps to destroy the 52nd Armored Division and be prepared to repel a counterattack by 1st Republican Guard Corps should they launch one. The big unknown variable we have right now is how aggressive these corps and division commanders may be, and if they'll be micromanaged from Baghdad. On paper, these corps and divisions look formidable. They even look like they may be on par with our own units. But it remains to be seen how they'll behave when pressed by a non-Arab adversary. Gentlemen, if there are no further questions, this concludes my portion of today's briefing. I will be followed by the G4, who will provide the logistics plan," Taylor concluded. He knew there would be no questions, as he had individually briefed each corps commander and their staff ahead of time. Now it was a matter of execution and minimizing the Iraqis' vote. In war, just as in politics, the enemy always gets a vote. Chapter 5. Underway. 8 March 1991. USS San Juan, Gulf of Oman. Commander David Osborne could not be happier. His first command and one of the newest subs in the fleet to boot. The USS San Juan SSN 751 had been commissioned only a year ago. She was a Los Angeles-class fast-attack submarine equipped with the latest AN/BSY-1 sonar suite, Mk-48 ADCAP heavyweight torpedoes, and 12 vertical launch tubes for her highly capable Tomahawk cruise missiles. The boat's Mk2 combat control system all-digital attack center integrated sonar, targeting, and tracking into one system and allowed for accurate and quick responses in a tactical situation. While this was Commander Osborne's first command, he had been in the silent service his entire career, and his 12 officers and 98 crewmen were old hands when it came to undersea warfare. For all the crew, this was at least the second boat they'd served on. For the past week, the San Juan had been monitoring traffic traversing the Strait of Hormuz. As the president's deadline approached, fewer ships were attempting to enter the strait, and more ships were coming out. Several ships that had been waiting to receive a pilot to take them through the minefield had departed the area in search of a port outside of the Persian Gulf. "Khan, sonar, we have another contact coming out at this time. Appears she's a tanker, designating Sierra 3. "Roger, Sierra 3, Commander Osborne said, returning to watch the view being transmitted through the ship of what the periscope was seeing and looking at the geographic plot on the combat system. The display showed 2 ships at 8,000 yards for one and 10,000 yards for the second, heading towards the strait, and 1 ship at 15,000 yards heading out of the strait. The ship coming out, designated Sierra 3, was getting out before the deadline, but Sierra 1 and Sierra 2 looked to be pressing their luck. The 1200 GMT deadline was passed by 30 minutes. Osborne's orders at this point were to observe and report. While he wasn't sitting near the entrance with his torpedo doors open, he did have them loaded and the tubes flooded and ready to fire should the need arise. As they watched what was going on via their periscope, 2 SH-60 helicopters came into view and circled above Sierra 1, an oil tanker that appeared to be empty based on how high it was sitting in the water. In contrast, Sierra 2, a container ship, was fully loaded and sitting low in the water from the added weight. Con, sonar, Sierra 1 and Sierra 2 are reducing revolutions. Roger, sonar, Commander Osborne said, still watching the screen. It was becoming obvious that both ships were slowing. Then, as expected, Sierra 1 commenced turning to port, followed by Sierra 2. I think the tanker may be going to Fujairah to take on a load, and the container might be going to Khor Fakkan. That's a container terminal, Osborne said to his cob, Master Chief Mark Young. Master Chief Young was coming up on his 18th year in the Navy. Like most who neared retirement, he'd started thinking about what he might do next. Raytheon had already sent someone by to talk to him about a position with their company if and when he decided to retire. Besides a very lucrative salary on top of his Navy retired pay, they also offered a stable home life, something his wife and teenage children would enjoy immensely after following him around from assignment to assignment. His son was at the age where a strong father figure was needed at home. Those ports are in Iraqi hands now, aren't they, Captain? The Master Chief questioned. Yeah, but we have no orders about stopping commercial traffic entering ports outside of the Persian Gulf, at least not yet. Master Chief Young looked over at Commander Osborne. Sir, when was the last time you got some sleep? You look like shit, sir, he said with a grin. With all due respect, sir, of course. You know, you're right. I'm going to lay down and get some sleep. Osborne turned to the executive officer. XO, how about you take it for the next 4 hours? Let's go deep to monitor Sierra 3 as she leaves the Gulf and listen for any other contacts. Aye, sir. XO has the con, the XO stated as Commander Osborne made his way forward to his cabin. Commander Osborne's quarters were nothing as extravagant as the captain's quarters on the Love Boat, but for a submarine, they were comfortable. The quarters consisted of a bunk, a wash basin, and a writing desk, about as fancy as it gets on a submarine and a private room to boot. A single chair accompanied the writing desk. Under the bunk were drawers for his clothes and a small closet to hang uniforms. Underway, everyone wore a blue jumpsuit that was wash and wear and sent to the boat's laundry for cleaning. Usually, the supply officer was the laundry officer, supervising a couple of crew members. On his writing desk, Osborne maintained a clean desktop with only a picture of his wife and daughter always kept out. When submerged, you didn't experience the same wave action as you did on the surface, so things were fairly stable unless an emergency surface or dive was executed. When he knew he'd be executing those maneuvers, he'd make sure to put the pictures away in his drawer so they wouldn't get flung off his desk. Kicking off his rubber-soled canvas loafers, he climbed into his bunk and pulled a blanket over himself. Although the boat was kept at a stable and comfortable temperature, Commander Osborne had to have some weight on him, such as a blanket, in order to sleep. Once his eyes closed, he quickly dropped into REM sleep and became dead to the world around him. Cap'n, wake up, sir, Master Chief Young said, gently tapping Commander Osborne's foot. Yeah, Cobb, I'm awake, a drowsy Osborne said. Is that coffee I smell? Yes, sir. I figured if I was to wake you, I should at least make it pleasant, like your wife would, Young said with a smile. You don't know my wife, Cobb. She would have poured it on me. What's up? How long was I asleep? Osborne asked, as he accepted the cup of coffee and swung his legs out of the bunk, feeling for his shoes with his feet. You've been asleep for 6 hours. The XO said to let you sleep. He's training that new officer right now in the con and didn't want you to witness the kid's mistakes," Cobb said, chuckling. "That bad?" "Sir, nothing you didn't do when you went aboard your first boat. You learned, and he'll learn too. Life teaches us lessons until we learn. Actually, sir, the reason I woke you is we have something in sonar that might interest you." At first they thought it was nothing, but the longer they listened, the more they were convinced it was something. "We've been tracking it for a couple of hours now," the Cobb explained. That immediately got Osborne's interest. "It's not another gray whale whistling Dixie, I hope," Osborne commented, slipping on his shoes and standing. "Let's go see what we have." They departed his cabin and walked down the passageway to the sonar room. The two sonarmen were seated, watching the waterfall on their digital screens. Grabowski was the senior sonarman and a petty officer first class. He was training Davis, who had served on a previous boat but had changed his rating to sonarman, so he was still learning according to Grabowski. "Grabowski, what you got?" Osborne asked when he came up behind the two. "Sir, we were tracking Sierra 3 as she came out of the strait. She was only making about 10 knots, which I thought was a bit strange for a tanker. She also didn't sound quite right. I was thinking she may have been having propulsion problems to be moving that slow. When she passed near us, the XO took us up for a peek, and she was identified as a Chinese-registered ship." "Nothing unusual about a Chinese tanker coming out," Osborne countered. "Well, sir, as we continued to listen to her, the sound changed and we began to track 2 vessels instead of 1, Grabowski said. "Sierra 3 moved off to the southeast, but this second vessel continued to the southwest, and the further it separated, the more distinct the sound was. Sir, it's a Chinese submarine, type 033 Romeo class." Osborne lifted an eyebrow at that. "Are you sure?" "Positive, Captain. Tracked them on my last boat out of Sasebo. We've designated him Sierra 4. Osborne quickly left sonar and entered the con. The XO saw him and announced, "Captain on the con." "Sir," the XO started, "we're tracking a—" Sonar filled me in. "Sir, Sierra 4 is 2,000 yards ahead and we're right behind him. He's doing 10 knots and noisy as hell. Not the usual silent types we're used to tracking. His heading is 190 degrees, and he's been on that track for the past hour." Sierra 3 turned to a 140-degree heading, and that's when we picked up Sierra 4. "He was right under Sierra 3, the XO indicated. Osborne glanced at the depth indication. 300 feet. "XO, let's get a message to NavCent and notify them of what we have here. Tell them my intentions are to track this guy and await instructions." "Aye, sir." The XO departed to get the report ready to send. The Cobb reached over and took the empty coffee cup from Osborne's hand. Osborne hadn't realized that he had finished the cup, but was still carrying it. His mind was somewhere else, like trying to figure out why a Chinese submarine was operating in an area that was about to turn into a war zone. Chapter 6. Tracking. 8 March 1991, USS San Juan, Gulf of Oman. It had been a couple of hours since the San Jose had sent a message to NavCent, indicating that they were trailing a Chinese Type 033 Romeo-class submarine. Osborne was in the wardroom, which wasn't much bigger than the table that the 12 officers could sit around. He knew he was eating a very satisfying dinner, but wasn't sure if it was breakfast time or supper time, unless he looked at the ship's clock, which indicated 1900 hours. 2 of the junior officers that were off watch were with him at the moment when the XO stuck his head in the doorway. "Captain, we got a response back from NavCent," he said. "What did they have to say?" Osborne asked, taking a drink of milk to wash his food down. "Sir, they said that sometime yesterday morning, a Romeo class left Bandar Abbas Naval Base and hasn't been seen since. It went out with a Kilo class sub as well. However, Intel says there were no Chinese personnel at the base in the past year. They want us to maintain contact with the Romeo and report its movement. We're not authorized to engage unless they engage us first or present a threat to friendly vessels." the XO said, handing Commander Osborne the message to read. He scanned it quickly and thought about what it meant. XO, let's maintain a track and plot every time there's a course change to see where he might be heading. Also, let's get a fix on where our fleet is operating, to include the Brits. I don't want to be following this guy and have to wait for him to put a fish into someone. Let's see if we can determine hostile intent before it happens. Finishing his dinner, Osborne was trying to figure out what this new contact was all about. They knew they had detected a Russian sub a few months back, but now a Chinese one. Something wasn't adding up. Could the Soviets and the Chinese have sold some of their older model subs to the Iraqis and the Iranians? Could the Iraqis and Iranians possibly be working together? The big brains at Naval Intelligence need to sort this out, so we know what we're facing out here. Captain Adil Kazemi was 48 years old and had served in the Iraqi Navy since he was 18. He was quickly noted for his intelligence and sent to further schooling at Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, England. He was one of several foreign students attending the 30-week course and graduated in the top 10% of the class. Returning to Iraq, he had become proficient in ship handling and developed an interest in submarine warfare. He'd written several papers on the need for Iraq to possess submarines in order to ensure freedom to the sea through the Strait of Hormuz. Soon he was off to Moscow for 3 years to learn more about the submarine service from the Soviets. Returning to Iraq, he had become vocal about the need for submarines. Finally, he had been noticed by Saddam, who had sent him to China to tour the Chinese submarine force. When he'd returned home, he'd brought with him an offer from the Chinese government to sell Iraq one of their older submarines, as long as it wasn't advertised to the world. However, since Iraq had no port for a submarine to operate out of, a deal was worked out between China and Iran for the sub to base out of Bandar Abbas. To the Iranians, this was like poking a sharp stick in the eye of the Americans, and more than worth putting their ire for Iraq aside. The enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of agreement. Captain Adil Kazemi was excited about his first command of Iraq's first submarine. He had received extensive training in submarine warfare from both the Soviet Union and China. He'd then undergone sea trials supervised by a Chinese submarine officer. In their training, the graduation exercise was a dry run on an American Navy cargo ship with a down-the-throat attack. It impressed the hell out of the Iranian skipper. With his crew trained, he now had his sailing orders: proceed into the Gulf of Oman and Arabian Sea and sink the American carriers. Kazemi found it convenient that a Chinese oil tanker was in port in Iran, and the captain, with some guidance from the Chinese embassy, had agreed to sail out of the Persian Gulf at a speed of no more than 10 knots for 48 hours on a heading of 131 degrees. The merchant captain knew better than to ask questions as to the low speed. He likely had his suspicions, but played along. When the 48 hours were up, he increased his speed to 15 knots and continued westward across the Indian Ocean. He was off the southern coast of Oman and had seen several military vessels, the most impressive being an aircraft carrier off the horizon roughly 12 miles to the east. The captain thought it might be a bit further, as he could only see the bridge and the aircraft landing. Below the waves, Kazemi also took note of the heavy screws, an aircraft carrier or maybe one of the American battleships. At surface level, the horizon was only 3 miles away, so viewing through the QZH-10 attack periscope would be a worthless and possibly dangerous exercise. He would have to rely on the HH-AQ-2-26K2A sonar system to guide him to the American fleet. He was content to continue a plot towards the heavy sounds and exercise some patience. "Sonar, distance to target," Kazemi asked. "Estimated range is 20 kilometers. "Roger," he acknowledged. "Helm, maintain course and depth." "Understood. Maintain course and depth." Several days later, Commander Osborne had been making the rounds throughout the boat. He enjoyed these walks. It was a chance for him to see the crew as it was working, and get to know the sailors, and let them get to know him. It also gave him a good perspective of the crew's morale. Like so many leaders, he had learned that if the crew was getting mail from home, if their pay was straight, and if the chow was good, then they were generally happy. If any one of those three got messed up, then he knew he would have a crew member with a less than perfect attitude, himself included. "Captain to the con," he heard over the ship's speaker system as he entered the engineering section of the boat. That might not be good. Commander Osborne turned and proceeded to the con. The officer of the deck was a lieutenant, and solid officer. When Osborne entered the con, the OOD and the XO were there, along with the navigation officer and weapons officer. "What's up?" Osborne asked, looking around the confined area. "Sir, Sierra 4 has changed course and is heading on a track to the fleet," the OOD indicated, as the others remained silent. "Any indication that he's opened his outer doors?" Osborne asked. "No indication, Captain," the OOD stated. "Range to target? 5,000 yards. Roger, plot a target solution. If he opens his outer doors, we'll engage as I consider that hostile intent. I want him sunk if he does that. Understood?" Everyone acknowledged, knowing this might be the first time a U.S. submarine had fired its weapons in anger since World War II. Captain Adil Kazemi was feeling confident as he gave the order to raise the periscope. His sonar station gave him no indication that they had been detected. As the periscope broke the waves, Kazemi could see that his target, the American aircraft carrier, was in the perfect position for his torpedo attack. Without looking away as he concentrated on his target, Kazemi ordered, "Open outer doors and prepare to fire." It was the last order he ever gave. B-808 Yaroslavl Iris Tarek, Indian Ocean. The Iris Tarek had slipped out of Bandar Abbas the same time and way as their Iraqi counterpart, underneath the belly of a giant freighter. Captain First Rank Alexander Nemitz was glad as hell he wasn't on one of those Chinese rust buckets. They were loud and noisy and attracted all sorts of unwanted attention. He knew even his Kilo class wasn't quite as good as the American boats, but they weren't far off. Standing on the bridge, Captain Nemitz asked, "What is the status of the Iraqi boat?" One of the Iranian officers replied, "She's 8,000 yards to our front, but she's picked up a tail." Captain Sayet looked surprised by the announcement. He turned to look at Nemitz. "How did you know there would be an American submarine waiting for them like that?" "It's what I would if I was an American." "Now what do we do?" Sayet pressed. "We slide in behind the American, and we stay in their baffles and we wait." Sayet smiled a devilish smile. While the Iraqis didn't know it, they were being used as bait. While the Americans were busy playing cat and mouse with the Shchuka and now following the Iraqi sub, the Iranian sub would slip in behind the American sub and put her on the bottom when the time came. Then they'd fire a spread of torpedoes at the American aircraft carrier not far away. For several hours, they waited. The American sub continued to follow the Iraqis as they got closer and closer to the American fleet. They had practically slipped through the outer perimeter of the carrier's escorts. The American submarine was the last and final line of defense for the carrier. "Are submarine operations always this boring?" Sayet asked. Nemitz lifted an eyebrow in surprise at the question. "Boring? Are you kidding me? This is the most excitement I've had in years. As submariners, we spend most of our careers playing cat and mouse with the Americans. When we leave our home ports, they usually have a submarine waiting for us. The Yankees, they like to follow you around, see what you are doing. We know they are there, so from time to time we'll try and mess around with them. We'll conduct some crazy maneuver we know will make them angry, but it'll usually get them to back off as well." "Crazy maneuver like what?" Smiling, Nemitz regaled him and the rest of the con with some of the stuff they'd do, from the Crazy Ivan turn to the occasional torpedo launch to blow up some underwater rocks or a sunken ship on the bottom of the ocean. Things the Americans would complain about feverishly if they could. From time to time, a news story of an encounter with a Soviet submarine playing war games off the coast of New York would warrant a splashy headline. Most of the time, people were generally oblivious to what was going on under the waves off their coasts. The Russians liked to remind the Americans they weren't as safe as they liked to think they were. As they waited to see what the Americans would do next, Sayat lowered his voice so only the two of them could hear. "What should we do with this American sub we're following?" This was one of those moments where years of experience in the silent service made all the difference. It was the reason he was still on board this sub, providing them with his expertise. Sayat just wasn't ready to be thoroughly on his own in combat. Taking a deep breath in, he quietly responded, "I'm thinking when those Americans fire, we fire. With our torpedo being fired into their baffles, they'll never hear it coming until it's too late. Once they are down, there will be some confusion amongst the surface ships. They'll all go to flank speed, which means it'll be too noisy for them to listen to us. I propose we close the gap with the American carrier just a bit, and then we fire a full spread of torpedoes at them. Then we go deep, and we slip away back to Bandar Abbas, or at least away from here, and reassess. If we're lucky, we might sink the carrier. If not, we'll have put her out of the war with the damage we'll cause," Nemitz explained. The opportunity to torpedo an American carrier was every Russian submariner's dream. Sayat nodded in agreement at the plan. They briefed the others on what they were going to do so that when the time came, they'd execute. Another hour went by with little in the way of action. The trio of subs continued to move closer and closer towards the American fleet at a steady pace of 10 knots. Then, out of nowhere, the action began. "Con, sonar. I'm detecting the sound of torpedo doors being opened. I can't make out if it's the Iraqis or the Americans, but whoever it is, they are likely preparing to fire." Nemitz asked, "How far away is the American carrier relative to the Iraqi sub and then us?" One of the crewmen replied, They are 6,000 meters from the Iraqi sub and 9,000 yards from us." "Con, sonar. Torpedo in the water. The American has fired on the Iraqi sub." Nemitz nodded to Sayat. It was time for him to give their own order. Captain Sayat grabbed for the handset. "Weps, Con. Fire torpedoes 1 and 3 at Sierra 1. Reload tubes 1 and 3. It felt like an eternity as they listened to their torpedoes race after the American sub. In a way, they felt bad about their brothers-in-arms on the noisier Chinese sub. There was nothing they could do. They were doomed, and they either knew it or were about to find out. The only consolation was that their deaths wouldn't be in vain. They'd nail the American submarine, and if all went according to plan, they'd land a few blows against that American aircraft carrier. Then they heard it. An explosion, followed by a second, likely the second torpedo. These explosions were followed by the breakup of the Iraqi sub as its internal compartments imploded from the water pressure. While the Iraqi sub was beginning to sink, the screws on the American submarine had jumped to full speed. The American sub had turned hard port as it released some countermeasures, but it was too late. On the advice of Nemitz, Sayat hadn't cut the wires to their fish until they were practically on top of the Americans. By the time they had, the torpedoes had already fully acquired them. They zoomed right past the noisemakers and zeroed in on the American. Boom! Boom! The first torpedo had nailed the rear of the submarine, crippling its engines and propulsion system. The second torpedo had hit the sub amidship, nearly ripping it in half. In fractions of a second, the sub had flooded nearly every compartment and room on the boat. It began to break apart and joined the Iraqi sub on an eternal patrol. "Con, sonar. The surface ships are increasing speed. I'm showing 2 frigates heading in our direction. The closest one is 13,000 yards, traveling at 25 knots. They look to be Knox-class ASW frigates. Weps, Con, how far away are we from that carrier? Con, Weps, we're now 6,000 yards from the carrier. Nemitz asked the sonar room which American carrier it was. That would tell him roughly how fast it could travel away from them. Sonar, Con. The carrier is the Midway. She's now accelerated to 33 knots. She's also turned onto a new heading that is going to take her on a track that will lead her towards us if we turn to a heading of 223 degrees. This will allow us to be in weapons range before they are able to flee the area. Syed looked at his helmsman. Turn us to 223 degrees. Make your depth 220 meters. Nemitz nodded in approval at the orders. It was exactly what he'd do if this was his command. They stayed on this course and heading for another 10 minutes as the distance between them, and the Midway continued to close. When they were within 4,600 yards of the carrier, Syed gave the order every Russian submariner could only dream of giving. Once all 6 of their 533-meter heavyweight torpedoes had been fired, they began the process of reloading their tubes and turning away to make their great escape. It was now a race to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the fast-approaching frigates now hunting for them. As the time ticked by, they eventually heard the sound of 4 impacts. It sounded like 2 of the torpedoes had missed. They heard a couple of additional explosions, but it didn't sound like the carrier was sinking. In any case, they'd successfully hit an American carrier with 4 torpedoes, and that was a huge win.
Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another video.
In the meantime, we have plenty of reading material to keep you busy. You can find it all on our website, frontlinepublishinginc.com.